share screen. All right, there we go. And we'll just pull this in so that we can admit people while they come. Well, let's begin with a word of prayer, and let's get right into our topic tonight. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your abundant blessings. We thank you for your great mercies. And as we have the opportunity of spending some time together this evening, we invite your presence to be here with us, and we ask for you to work out your will and way. And be our teacher this evening and teach us more of the deep things of God, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So we are going right back to our topic, the law of life. Again, if you want to follow along and have a more thorough something to follow along, then there's the book, The Law of Life. It's, again, available on Amazon, both in Kindle and in paperback form. And also, if you are following along with it, just to let you know that these numbers down in the bottom left here, sometimes you'll see them in the bottom right, but in the bottom left, those numbers are the page number in the paperback book that we're going to be at. I'm not sure if it correlates with Kindle book, but it's the page numbers in the paperback book that you can follow along. Anyway, so we talked yesterday about disease. We talked about cause and effect. We talked about the analogies of the tree and of the roadway, and we looked at cells and how the cells function. And today we're going to dive right into the different causes of dysfunction. Now, the first cause of dysfunction that we're going to talk about is inheritance. Now, when I say inheritance, I don't mean exactly that it's genetic, although it has to be genetic. What do I mean? Well, every disease has at least a genetic component because it has to have the genes available in order to manifest the disease the way that it does. If you don't have the disease the genes or the code to manifest the cause in that particular way, then you're never going to end up developing that disease, whatever the disease might be. And so inheritance, what I'm talking about here with inheritance is that you have a situation where somebody has a change or a dysfunction in the genetic code, and that change or that dysfunction in the genetic code is passed on from, of course, one generation to the next. So it comes either through the parents or obviously through the parents, or through grandparents. We're not talking about novel mutations in the individual themselves, but actual mutations that have happened in a prior generation, and those mutations then being transmitted on to the next generation. And these are involved in genes where there is, you have to use these genes. They are necessary for normal, proper function in the body. And if it's mutated, then you end up getting serious dysfunction. Examples of inherited conditions might be things like cystic fibrosis, also Huntington's chorea. We think of sickle cell disease and so on. One of the problematic things about inherited conditions, inherited diseases, is that you cannot remove the cause, because the cause occurred in a prior generation, and you and I can't time travel. We can't go to the past in order to then gather that information back, stop the thing from happening, and so on. And because you came as a single cell from father and a single cell from mother, and those two sex cells joined together in order to form you, and you come from that single cell joined together of those two parents, then every cell in your body, if there was a dysfunction at that time, every cell of the body has that dysfunction in it, or that dysfunctional gene, but not every cell will use the dysfunctional gene. For example, if you have sickle cell disease, well, there is genetic mutation, but that genetic mutation is on a particular gene that is used to produce hemoglobin molecules. Now, the only cells that produce hemoglobin molecules are your red blood cells, and so they're the only cells that are affected by this mutation. But how many of the red blood cells would you expect to be affected by it? All of them, because all of them have the dysfunctional gene. And so all of them, when they try to use that gene, they're going to have dysfunction associated with it. And the same is true of the other different dysfunctions that are out there because of inheritance. And because that's the case, you and I can't go through and just change the DNA in every cell of our body. We have, again, up to 100 trillion cells in our body. And so if we went and we were very good at fixing DNA, and we just fixed it one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, it would be millions of years later before we actually finished. And of course, we would be long dead by then. So from a human's perspective, we cannot remove the cause, and we cannot reverse the disease when it's an inherited condition, an inherited disease, as I'm describing it here. But that does not mean that God cannot. God, his hands are not bound so that he cannot heal even when it comes to an inherited condition. But man's are when it comes to inherited conditions. And this only represents about maybe 1, maybe 2% of the diseases or the dysfunctions that are out there. Our second cause for dysfunction is environment. So you can have environmental issues that cause dysfunction. This is because the cells exist within a particular environment, and there are certain things that are necessary for cells to function well. For example, you need pressure, a certain amount of pressure. Now, not too much. If if you get hit by a car, well, that's too much pressure, and there's going to be definite dysfunction associated with that. But you can also have damage or dysfunction because of too little pressure. We don't usually run into that because people aren't often playing around with vacuums or in really high elevations, but you can get high altitude pulmonary edema and high altitude encephalopathy and other problems by being in a very high altitude where it has low pressure and the effects of low pressure on the body. Now, if you become an astronaut and you're going into outer space, well, one of the reasons that you have to be in a compartment, or if you're flying in high elevations in a regular transcontinental flight or something like that, where you're 40,000, 45,000 feet in the air, well, the reason that your cabin is pressurized is because you need to have that pressure. If all of a sudden a window broke out of the airplane and the pressure dropped significantly, well, you'd have significant problems associated with that. And especially if you're up in the space station and it kind of breaks open and you get into the very little pressure of the atmosphere of space, well, then you would die very quickly. So you need a certain amount of pressure in order for you to live. You also need a certain amount of temperature for you to live as well. And so when we get outside of the ranges of those temperatures, then we have problems. We've got burns, or we freeze ourselves, and you have very real dysfunction that happens because of that environmental temperature. And finally, we come in contact with radiation. Now, radiation can have temperature effects as well, but we can have exposure to like ionizing radiation, gamma rays, X-rays, and so on. And if you walked into a nuclear reactor and just sucked in all of the nuclear reactive radiation that was there, well, you wouldn't last very long, because that radiation at such a high level, it overwhelms your body's ability to fix the damage that is caused by that radiation. So you can have environmental causes of dysfunction, again, pressure, temperature, electromagnetic radiation, and so on. You can also have dysfunction because of inheritance that we talked about already from a prior generation. The third cause for dysfunction is raw materials. So what about raw materials? Well, you can have raw materials that are toxins. You can have toxins as raw materials. You can have the wrong raw materials. So instead of breathing oxygen, you're breathing nitrogen or helium. Oh, that's fun to have helium. Breathe in the helium and you sing like a chipmunk and talk like a chipmunk and so on. But if you get an environment where you stick your head in the helium balloon and that's all you're breathing is the helium, well, it's not very long before you pass out. And if you stay in that environment, then you're going to die. Why? You're going to die because that's not what you need. It's the wrong thing. You need oxygen. and you need a certain amount of oxygen. Or you can have an imbalance of raw materials. So salt, you need salt. You've got to have salt to live. But you can have too much salt, you can have too little salt. You need water to live too, but you can have too much water and you can have too little water. So an imbalance of regular raw materials as well are things that can cause dysfunction too. Now, I want to camp on this ground a little bit because I think for the most part, we misunderstand the effect of raw materials or the impact that raw materials has on as far as a cause is concerned. For example, we know that processed red meats, the World Health Organization has identified processed red meats as a class 1 carcinogen. So that means that there's as much evidence out there that processed red meats causes cancer as there is evidence that smoking causes cancer and asbestos causes cancer and other things that are very clearly cancer-causing agents. And so the more you consume processed red meats, the more likely you're going to end up with cancer. We also know that cardiovascular disease in the arteries, that cardiovascular disease is associated with the consumption of cholesterol. And so if you have a high cholesterol consumption in your diet, you are more likely to progress as far as that cholesterol plaque is concerned, and you're more at risk for developing stroke and heart attack, kidney failure, circulatory issues, and so on. And when we talk about gout or gouty arthritis, we know that gout, it's a painful, red, swollen, hot inflammation of a joint or a couple of joints or sometimes more extensive, typically at the base of the big toe. That first joint of the big toe. At the foot, that's usually the most common place, and when it's there, it's called podagra. Well, we know that it's associated with uric acid. So there's a substance called uric acid that you have in the bloodstream. It's a breakdown product of DNA and RNA and so on. And in some individuals, it doesn't get filtered very well, and the concentrations stay elevated. And when it's elevated and it becomes concentrated, then it can crystallize, and it forms little crystals. And those crystals are pointy, sharp, pokey, and it starts poking, and it crystallizes in a joint. And then it starts poking the edges of the joints and creates inflammation and pain and swelling and so on. That's the theory. So we believe that that processed red meats causes cancer. We believe that cholesterol causes coronary artery disease in the heart. We believe that elevated uric acid levels creates gout. But I want to challenge that thought a little bit. When, let's say, for instance, that the doctor is concerned that you have gout. You've got pain in your foot, it's swollen, and so on. And they want to check and make sure that this indeed is gout or that it's not gout. So what are they going to do? Well, they're going to send you to go get some blood work so that we can check and see what your uric acid levels are. And of course, when you go to the laboratory and you hand them your order, the ticket or whatever it is, the prescription for you to get the blood test, of course, on the blood test, it mentions that they should draw the blood from your foot. Or does it? Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't instruct you to go and get your blood drawn from your foot. You get blood drawn from the regular place, either on the back of your hand or up here in your arm and so on. That's usually where they get the blood from. So how would you know that what you're drawing here represents what's going on in your foot? There's got to be something that tells us that we can be confident that if we draw blood in one part of the body, it can represent the level of that same material in other parts of the body as well. We call that diffusion. Maybe you remember chemistry class, and the science professor had this nice 3 bowls of crystal clear bowls that have water in them, and 3 of them sitting next to each other. And in one of them, he drops a drop of black dye, and the other one he drops a drop of purple dye, and the other one he drops a drop of red dye. And you look at them, and then he doesn't mention anything and goes through class and talks about class and the things that are going to be teaching for the day. And you sit there and you watch, and by the end of class, the red is all mixed in, the purple is partially mixed, and the black is still pretty much a blob just in the middle. Well, is it because of the color why it mixed in here and it's partially mixed here and it's really not much mixed as well here? No, it's because of the temperature of the water that it's in. Hot water, the molecules of that water moves faster, and so when you put another substance in it, those moving molecules are going to disrupt the molecules of the dye, and then they're going to start spreading out in that environment. That's called diffusion. Now, the colder it is, the slower that happens, and of course, if you put it on ice cubes, well, it's not going anywhere. So what's happening in the bloodstream? Well, when you eat an apple or something like that, and you get carbohydrates, and that gets broken down into simple sugars. And those simple sugars get into your bloodstream in the digestive tract. Well, when it gets into the bloodstream in the digestive tract, it's going to increase the amount of sugar right there in that area, but then that's going to circulate. It goes to the liver, and then it gets back into the regular circulatory system, goes through the heart, pumps through the arteries to the various different parts of the body, and moves and moves and moves and mixes. Now, what happens if you get that black dye in the cold water and you put a spoon in there and you mix? Well, right away, it's going to mix up and diffuse into it, and you're going to have an even concentration of that black dye throughout all of that body of water, just like the other ones will eventually get to. Same thing happens in the bloodstream. So I can draw your blood here. We can send that to test it in the lab somewhere, and I can be confident that the concentration of whatever we're looking for is essentially the same anywhere throughout the rest of the circulatory system because of that law of diffusion. And it's always there, and we can trust in it. So if that's the case, and somebody has gout, and the gout is in their right toe, mind you, or the left, we can pick one or the other. If it's in that one, it's the right side, and I do a blood test up here, and the uric acid levels are elevated up here, how come I don't have gout in my arm? How come I don't have it in my wrist? How come I don't have it in my fingers? How come I don't have it in my shoulders? How come I don't have it in my neck or my back or my hips or my knees or other places? How come I don't even have it in my left foot? I only have it in my right foot, or it's in my left, but it's not in the right, or sometimes it's in both. Some people say, well, it's because it's the farthest away from the heart. Actually, there's one joint farther than that, and it's usually not in that joint. So what is it that can cause the gout when it comes to that raw material of uric acid? Well, by law, the uric acid itself cannot be the cause. Cannot be the cause. Why? Because the concentration of the uric acid, because of the law of diffusion, the concentration becomes even throughout the bloodstream. And so there has to be something else that causes the uric acid to concentrate, to accumulate in that area. Same thing is true when we're talking about cholesterol plaques and blockages of arteries. Now, I don't have a picture of it here, but you've got an artery that's running alongwise like this, and in that artery, notice in the middle that it comes together, and then so just imagine that it's running along this way, and so the artery is quite open over here, becomes narrowed here in the middle, and then it opens back up and keeps going that way, and so you have a narrowing right here in this area. Well, that narrowing right there, it's because you have cholesterol plaque accumulating in the walls of the artery on one side or the other. But what was the concentration of cholesterol in the bloodstream before you got to the plaque, when you were at the plaque, and then after you got to the plaque? Well, it was essentially the same, just like the uric acid. So the cholesterol itself could not be responsible for its accumulation in that one area, because if it was responsible, it has to be an even distribution, an even laying it down. And so if there's any unevenness about its concentration or its laying it down, then there has to be something else that is responsible for its accumulation in that area. And when we go back to the processed meat and cancer, let's say somebody developed breast cancer, left breast, and they've been eating processed meats, and so they develop breast cancer, and the doctor says, well, it's probably the processed red meats that you were eating that caused the breast cancer. Okay, but when you ate that salami and those hot dogs and those other things, and you continued to do so, what concentration did those things get in the bloodstream? Well, same. It got distributed evenly throughout the bloodstream. So why did you end up with a breast cancer starting right here, and you didn't end up with it starting over here or down there or some other place? So there had to be something else that created a susceptibility. Now, it's true, if you take away the cancer-causing substances, if you take away if you have somebody that doesn't take any of those bad things, doesn't come into cancer-causing materials and so on and so forth, that you're significantly going to reduce your risk of developing cancer. It's true that if you decrease cholesterol, or you even use, well, I say use cholesterol-lowering medication. In fact, there has been one study of medication intervention with cholesterol showing a reduction in cholesterol plaque, and it showed a reduction of 1%. 1% in cholesterol plaque, which really is questionable because we're not sure whether we can actually reliably tell the difference between 1% and not. So essentially, no medication has ever proven to reverse cholesterol plaque and cardiovascular disease. The only things in research that have ever been shown to reverse it is dietary change, whole food, plant-based diet, and exercise with stress management. Right? So those have been shown. Can it be it's not the cholesterol. There has to be something else that causes the cholesterol to accumulate and cause that area to be problematic. And the same thing with the gout in the toe. There has to be something else that causes it to accumulate. It cannot be the raw material. But if you take the raw material away, if you take a medication to decrease uric acid levels, well, guess what? The gout goes away. You decrease cholesterol consumption and you increase exercise and other things, and plaque level starts going down. Well, that's great, right? But you still haven't taken care of the thing that caused it to accumulate in that one area. So when we think of raw materials, if raw materials is a cause, then the cause must manifest in a fairly generalized, even distribution throughout the body, depending on what tissues need those raw materials. Right? And if it's localized, if it's focal, if it's in one spot versus another spot, then there has to be another thing that causes it. One of those things that can cause localized dysfunction is environment. You can shoot yourself in one foot and the other foot is perfectly fine. You can burn your one finger and your other fingers are fine. You can, well, it's harder for us to do this, but you can get electromagnetic radiation. You go out in the sun and you sunbathe too long and you burn your back, but you didn't burn your front. Right? So it's localized dysfunction associated. You can have localized dysfunction, or if you drop in a cauldron of boiling oil, all of your body, well, all of it's going to get burned. And if you get out into the environment of space, out in outer space, well, all of you is going to die and have problems associated with that. But you can have localized dysfunction. The other thing that can cause localized dysfunction is energy. What do I mean by energy? It's what we were talking about yesterday. It's that which comes through thought, mediated via the cortex of the brain, through the various nerve pathways to the different cells of the body, in order to give them that spark, that generation of energy, and also to control their function. And that can cause localized dysfunction, just like environmental issues can cause localized dysfunction. Right? And so that is another thing that we need to really consider, because what is it that could cause accumulation of cholesterol in an artery? Well, we know inflammation is a process that leads to cholesterol plaque development, but what causes the inflammation? And that's a question. It cannot be inheritance. Can't be. Cannot be. Because if it was inheritance, if it was a DNA, messed up DNA from the parents, that messed up DNA is in every cell of the body, and every cell of the same type must manifest it. And so if that was the case, then you should see it all throughout the inside lining of the arteries and so on, not in specific locations. It cannot just be raw materials because, again, the cholesterol concentration is essentially the same throughout all of the arteries. So it has to either be environment, so there's some kind of pressure, temperature, or electromagnetic radiation thing that's going on now and continues to go on to lead to inflammation that then causes an accumulation of that cholesterol plaque. Or the other option is it could be the energy. Why is that the case? Well, because you can have nerve endings that go to that spot that don't go to the next spot. And so those nerve endings can communicate information, can create neurohormones, neuropeptides, and so on that stimulate an inflammatory response. And the immune system gets involved in inflammatory response. Now, when you have an environment of high cholesterol, you've got this inflammation. Now you start developing a cholesterol plaque. Same thing can happen with the foot and gout. Same thing can happen with a cancer in its susceptibility to substances that are not healthy for the body, and so on and so forth. So it's the mind that can do that in many cases. And I propose to you, and we're going to see how this works, that this cause, this energy, this localized dysfunction that you can have, that is about 90% of all bodily dysfunctions, of all diseases out there, is going to be this. And most people are not looking for it, although some research is really discovering how that works. It's quite interesting to look at that, neuroimmunology. Now, for example, a study that was done, let's see, do I have the mice up here? There we go. All right, so here's a study that was done between 2000 and 2013, actually a number of studies that were published by this group. And what they were doing, initially they were testing a substance to see if it had anti-inflammatory properties, that they could use it as a pain and anti-inflammatory medication. And so if you're going to do that, you've got to do a lot of studies with a lot of animals to make sure that it's safe before you ever start trying it on humans. And one of the studies that you do is you do an intrathecal injection. So you have this nice thing called the blood-brain barrier, and the blood-brain barrier helps to keep many things in the blood and keep it out of the brain, and only certain things across into the brain. Because even simple things like amino acids, certain amino acids, when you break down proteins, like if you have a meal and you eat that meal and you digest the proteins, you get the amino acids from it. Certain of those amino acids are actually neurotransmitters in the brain. And if those concentrations elevate and you don't have that blood-brain barrier, you can have seizures every time, or have thinking problems or hallucinations or whatever from just having a meal every time you eat. So that would be crazy. So you've got this blood-brain barrier that keeps certain things in and most everything else out. And so a lot of times, if you're testing a substance, a medication, drug, other things like that, then it won't get across that blood-brain barrier. But some individuals, some people have problems with their blood-brain barrier, and so you've got to test to see what would happen if it does. And so an intrathecal injection, you get the medication and you inject it into the fluid space that's around the brain, so you get past that blood-brain barrier to see how now the animal is going to respond to that. And what they found was very interesting. The mice that they were studying, the mice stopped producing tumor necrosis factor alpha. What is TNF-alpha? TNF-alpha is one of the prominent inflammatory molecules of the immune system. And so the TNF-alpha, they basically stopped their production of TNF-alpha, but TNF-alpha is not made predominantly in the brain. It's made elsewhere in the body, predominantly by your natural killer cells, and they're not up in the brain. And so they were kind of scratching their heads trying to figure out what was going on. So over a period of a number of years, what they finally discovered was this, when they injected that substance around the brain, it changed the signal that was being sent by the brain down the vagus nerve to the spleen, just under the diaphragm on the left. That spleen received the information, and the spleen is a big place for the immune system. And so the spleen there, the signal was received. T helper cells went and part of your white blood cells went and communicated with natural killer cells, other parts of your white blood cells, and those natural killer cells that are the prominent producers of TNF alpha, they stopped their production of tumor necrosis factor alpha. Very interesting. So changing a chemical changed the signal, which changed how the immune system functions. Well, they weren't just satisfied with that. They want to see if they could do it another way. And could we get around the chemical? Could we use an electrical signal to do the same thing? And indeed, after a number of years, they were able to identify the nerve fibers that went to the spleen, and they were able to find the frequency, the electrical frequency that they could use to stimulate those nerve fibers, and they got the same response. Absolutely awesome. So just by changing the electrical frequency or the signal being sent down the nerves, they could change how the immune system functions. And we also know, when it comes to cancer, that if you have a tumor that's growing and you cut the nerve that goes to the center of that tumor, the tumor changes how it behaves. In fact, there's a review article that was written in the end of 2018 looking at all of the steps of cancer, its development, and its metastasis, and it shows that every step along the way, the nervous system has an impact where it helps the cells to stay alive, it helps them in their mutation process, it helps them to be able to separate from their basement membrane without dying. It helps them to hide from the immune system. It helps them to draw blood vessels to it so it keeps its growth. It helps it to be able to spread to other locations and so on. So the nervous system has a huge impact upon cancer and its growth and its spread. And it's not surprising to me to see this research. Why? Because I've been taking care of patients with cancer for a long time now. And when I talk to patients about their story, I find that the vast majority of individuals who developed their cancer did so within a year or a few years of major traumatic events, losses, major stressors, and so on in their life. And now that we know the research, it makes very much sense how that happens, right? Or that it happens. And finally, you've got inheritance, you've got environment, you've got raw materials, you've got energy. Finally, you have the enemy. And we know this from Job in the Bible. Job, he was a righteous man in all his ways. That was God's testimony of him. And so in that story, we have the enemy that's coming. That actually causes Job's disease, his boils, and so on. And it wasn't because of an inheritance issue. It was not an environmental issue. It was not raw materials, and it wasn't the way that Job was thinking or the attitudes that he had. He had the right thinking, the right attitudes. It was the enemy that caused that. And so these are things that we need to consider when we think about our own conditions or the conditions of others that we're working with. Is it inheritance? If so, it's from a prior generation. You can't remove the cause, and you can't really reverse the disease that manifests from it. Secondly, if it's environmental issues, then it's a pressure, temperature, or electromagnetic radiation. Usually we recognize when this is the case. You know, when you hit your thumb with a hammer or you burned yourself or so on. So those are usually not surprises. Although maybe you can get some surprises with electromagnetic radiation, but if it's to the degree that you need to really produce dysfunction, that's going to hurt when you get it. Raw materials, well, we blame a lot of things on raw materials where the raw materials are really only the cofactor. They're not the real cause. The vast majority is right here. It's how you think, it's your attitudes, and how you respond to situations that's going to impact this. And then we've got to recognize there is some involvement here directly from the enemy in certain cases. And so those are all things that we need to take into consideration. All right, so we have proper actions like breathing. Breathing is a good action. That's a good thing to do. And if you combine that good action with the good thing that you need, like oxygen from the air, then you've got health. But if you have the same action of breathing and you now breathe carbon monoxide, well, it's not going to have so much health for so long. You're going to have dysfunction associated with that. You have the same action of drinking. You drink water, that's going to bring health. But if you try drinking antifreeze, well, that's not going to work so well either. If you are eating, you can eat a nice healthy apple. That can help as far as health is concerned. But if you eat rat poison, well, not going to work so well. You're going to end up with dysfunction and death associated with it if you eat too much. It's true also that our thinking, when we have right thinking, when our thoughts are right, when they're good, that will promote health. But when we have the same action of thinking, but we have the wrong source, we're thinking on the wrong things, then that can lead to dysfunction as well, and eventually death too. So you only have health if you have the right action and the right source. Once you have the wrong action, even if it's the right source, that's going to cause dysfunction. Like you have the right source of water, but you have the wrong action. Breathing, right? Breathe the water, sorry, not going to work so well. And so on. You can have the right action, breathing, but you can have the wrong source. Again, carbon monoxide. That's going to bring disease and death. But you can have the wrong action, hyperventilating. The wrong source, carbon monoxide. Well, you're going to get to death and disease a lot faster if you do that. So if you want health, we've got to have the right action with the right source. So what can my needs tell me? What do I discover about myself when I understand or when I see what I need? First of all, question, I'll ask it, and hypothetically, I guess. You're not going to answer right now. But again, if you're watching and you've got questions, write down the questions. We're going to do Q&A afterwards. So can you create that which you need? Can you create that which you need? And the answer is no, you cannot. Because if you could, it wouldn't be a need, right? If you could create what you need, it wouldn't be a need. So can the body create what it needs? Can the spirit create what it needs? No, neither of them can. Neither can create what it needs. So do you need love? Do you need love? Well, yes. Again, I've gone many places around the world, asked many audiences the question, is there anybody here that does not need love? And I haven't met anybody yet. So yes, we need love. So then can we produce or can we create love? Well, the answer is no, we can't. We cannot produce it or create it because if we could, it wouldn't be a need of ours. Wouldn't be a need of ours. So is that just our condition on this chat, or is it everybody's condition? Well, that's the condition of everybody. Everybody in this world, whether if they're a human being and if they're on a space station or wherever they're at, every human being needs love. That means that no human beings can create or produce love. So what kind of love do you need? Do you need a love that is personal or one that's impersonal? Do you need a love that is pure or one that's corrupted? Do you need a love that is unlimited or one that is limited? Right? Well, the answer is you need a love that's personal. You need a love that is pure. You need a love that is unlimited. Personal, pure, unlimited. That's the kind of love that you need. So let's look at natural selection a little bit. This is the process whereby organisms better adapted to their environment tend to survive and produce more offspring. We're familiar with this theory. It's taught in all the schools, at least there's a few schools that might not, but it's general knowledge, right? in this process of natural selection. What happens if you introduced into a species a mutation that introduces the need for something for which there is no source? You introduce a need for which there is no source. What have you now just guaranteed is going to happen to that organism? Well, it's going to die. It's going to die. Because if it has a need for that thing, it can't live without it. But if there's no source for the thing that it needs, then it's going to die out. Now, interestingly enough, we as a species, human beings, we have written records from 5,000 or so years ago, Sanskrit writings, papyrus, things on Egyptian hieroglyphics and so on. So at least for the last 5,000-ish years, we have written language that we can go back and we can look at, and we find that there is a need for love all the way back from the very genesis of writing and written language that we can find. So humans have needed love at least for the last 5,000 years. But humans cannot create or produce the love that they need. But we're still here. We're still alive. What does that mean? That means that there has to be a source for love. There has to be a source for love. That source is still around, and that source is not people. It's not. Can't be. So what is that source of love? Right. We're going to go on. Can someone else breathe for me? Like, I'm starving for breath, I can't get enough, my lungs are filling up, so you hyperventilate a little bit for me. Is that going to help me out? Nope, not at all. Can someone else drink for me? I'm starving from thirst and I'm about to die, and you're over there and you're in a wet environment with a nice creek, crystal clear creek, and you go take a drink for me. Can it help me? No. Can someone else eat for me? If only we could solve all of the problems of starvation in this world. Because everybody who has way too much to eat and have eaten way too much, well, they could eat some for somebody else who's starving and can't find any food. So no, that doesn't work. Only my actions, not your actions, affect my health. Only what I do, not what you do, affects my health. Another human being cannot be the source of that which I as a human being need, because I need it too. So I can't go to you to be my source of oxygen. If I do, I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to run out really fast. I can't go to you to be my source of water, my source of food, and so on, because if I do, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to take away what you need, and you're going to die, and then I'm going to run out of source, and I'm going to get frustrated because you don't have sufficient to keep me alive and keep me going. So can another person be my source of love? Can they? No, they can't. They cannot be the source. And this is a basis of relationship issues. How's that? Well, imagine that you have a neighbor, and here we've got a picture. So you have this neighbor, and he comes over all the time. He's knocking on the door, and he wants this and he wants that, and he's always asking for things. And so when the door knocks, you know who to expect. Well, one day it's a desperate knock. And you can't ignore this one. So you go to the door, and there he is. He's desperate. His child has come down with a severe illness. It's a terminal illness, and it's been 100% fatality rate so far. And so has gone and had it all, the testing and everything like that. And the physicians have said, well, we're sorry, we can do comfort measures, but there's not really anything else for your child. But he's not satisfied with that, so he went online and went searching and found that there is a center off in the middle of China. Okay, we'll just say China. All right, so it's off in the middle of China, and that center has found out how to treat this condition, and they have a 50-50 success rate. Now that is an infinite percent more than zero. And so that's great, 50% chance. Well, it only costs $5 million for treatment, and because it's China, you got to pay up front before you have treatment. So he's coming to you, the neighbor's coming to you for $5 million. How many are you going to give him $5 million? No one? Why not? Oh, okay. So you don't have $5 million. All right. So do you have something? Yeah, maybe you have something. Maybe you can give him $1,000 to go towards this $5 million goal. But he comes back later in the day, knocking on the door, and he wants the rest of the $5 million. And he comes back later, and he wants the rest of the $5 million. And he comes back tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and he keeps wanting the $5 million. How do you feel? Well, you feel frustrated. You're frustrated. Why? Because he's coming to you to get what you don't have. Right? You don't have what he needs. He needs $5 million. You don't have it. You can't give it to him, but he wants it. You gave him what you could, but it was insufficient. And guess what? How does he feel? As crazy as this situation is, guess what? He's frustrated too. Why? Because he thinks you're the source of what he needs, and you're not giving it to him. He's not getting it. So both you and he are frustrated. Why? Because he's barking up the wrong tree. He's going to the wrong source. Same in relationships. Same in relationships. Can you find another human being that can give you a love that does not end, that is completely full, and that is selfless? Well, that's the kind of love that you need. You need a love that's personal. You need a love that endures, right? That is not corrupted, it's pure, and it doesn't run out. Have you found that in people? No, you haven't. But guess what? We still go to people as if they're our source so that we might get the love that we need. But we get frustrated because they don't perform the way that we want them to perform. They don't fulfill us the way that we want to be fulfilled, or that we need to be fulfilled, actually. They don't. And we get frustrated at them because they don't work right. And they get frustrated at themselves and at us because we're demanding something that, well, they get frustrated because they think they should be able to provide, they should be able to make us happy, and so on and so forth, but they can't. They can't. Because they don't have what we need. It's a big problem in relationships. So whose responsibility is it for me to be filled with oxygen? What's mine? I got to breathe. Whose responsibility is it for me to be filled with water? It's mine. I've got to drink. And whose responsibility is it for me to be filled with proper nutrients? It's mine. I've got to choose the food and I've got to eat it. So have you ever been empty when it comes to love? Even partially? Less than 100%. Well, yes, of course. So whose responsibility is it for me to be filled with love, or for you to be filled with love? Is it God's, or is it yours? Of course, God is the source of love. I think most of us have figured that out. And what kind of love does he have? What kind of love is he? He is exactly the love we need. Exactly the love we need. Now, is it his responsibility to fill me with love, or is it my responsibility to fill with love? It's mine. It's my responsibility. So if you're ever empty or partially empty, don't blame God. Not his responsibility. It's not his job, right? If it was God's responsibility, we're told that he does how many things well? He does all things well. How often does he do all things well? He does all things well all the time. So if it was God's responsibility, he does all things well all the time. We would be completely full, never less than 100% full of love. But if we have even one moment in our lives where we are, that's evidence it's not his responsibility. It's our responsibility to take the love that's available. Now, speaking about available, humans run into situations where, well, badness happens, and we don't have anything to control that. Here's a picture of Auschwitz. Here, a number of Jews and others were taken to supposedly get a shower, and instead of water coming out, it was poison gas. The environment was chosen for them. It was a poisonous environment. It contained a poison. They had one choice. Well, they had no choice about their end product. They were going to die. The choice that they had was, how were they going to die? Were they going to die by holding their breath and dying, or were they going to die by breathing the poison and dying? There was no choice of what environment they could take from. They were forced to take that environment around them. When it comes to love, will we ever be in that situation where we're forced to take of a poisonous environment around us without any choice for something different? I propose to you the answer is no. Let's imagine that you've been fasting. You've been fasting for a long period of time, maybe a whole week, and it's time to break your fast. And you go to a restaurant. It's a healthy restaurant, has all sorts of wonderful dishes. And in that healthy restaurant, you have salads, and you've got hors d'oeuvres, and you've got entrees, and you've got desserts, and you've got all sorts of stuff that you couldn't imagine, and it's all healthy. And you know, you're not going to eat all 200 dishes, so you take your bowl and plate and spoon and fork and knife and tray and a few extra napkins to wipe up all the dribble, and you know, you go walking through and looking at everything and going, oh yeah, I want some of that, and oh, that looks good, and oh, I'm going to choose that, and so on. And then you do something curious. You leave your bowl and plate and spoon and fork and knife and tray and napkins there, and you go outside. And you have this thought, hang on, I'm still hungry. I'm going to sue that restaurant. You think you're going to get very far with that suit? Well, no, I hope not. I hope you're not. Right? If you do, then this world is really going to hell in a handbasket. But so no, you should not win that. You should not win that lawsuit. Why? Because everybody knows it's not the restaurant's responsibility to feed you. It's your responsibility to take what you need and to eat it. And if you go in the restaurant and you don't take and you don't eat, it's your problem, not the restaurant's problem. The restaurant just needs to make sure that it's available and it meets certain standards. So God is a God of love, and God has a buffet of love. And that buffet of love includes things like grace and security and belonging and truth and mercy and acceptance and justice and freedom. But you know, it has some other things in there like self-denial and self-sacrifice and you know, other things like that. But it's exactly what we need. It's exactly what we need. All of these wonderful different dishes that are there, and God makes that buffet available to you. He says in his word, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Hebrews 13 verse 5. I will never leave you nor forsake you. That means that his buffet of love is available. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365.25 days a year. It is never closed. It's always open. Jeremiah 31:3 tells us that I have loved you with an everlasting love, therefore with loving kindness I have drawn you. That tells us that no dish will ever be empty. It's an everlasting love. None of it will ever go away. It's always full. And finally, in Isaiah 55 and verse 1, we're told, ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Yes, come buy wine and milk without money and without price. So God has done something remarkable. He has paid for it all. It's not cheap, it's expensive, but he has paid for it all so that for you it might be free. So it's always open, it's always available, it's always full, it's always free. Knowing that, you will never be in an environment where you have to take of the hurtful environment that somebody else provides. Because his buffet of love is always available. You can always come and take from it. And your outcome is not dependent upon what somebody else says and somebody else does. Your environment is dependent upon what you take from. Now, it's true that his is not the only buffet that's out there. There are other buffets too, and here we have the buffet of selfishness. So the buffet of selfishness is the buffet that others provide. And it has some pretty enticing dishes on there, like power and pleasure and popularity and possessions, but it involves things like betrayal and abuse and deceit and control and manipulation and so on and so forth. I mean, you just think about it. There's selfishness and there's pride and there's envy and there's boasting and there's gossip and all that kind of stuff. It all comes along with it. And so it's got some things to entice us, to make us say, ooh, yeah, maybe that. But it's got a lot of badness along with it as well. And I will tell you this, human nature gravitates to this. So I don't want to, I'm not laying blame at anybody. All of us, by default, we eat from this buffet table down here, the buffet of others. By default, that's what we do, because that's what we're attracted to. Our human nature draws us in this direction. Just like if this screen was up here and down here, and you were in the middle, gravity would pull you down every time. Well, it's true that every time you will choose to eat from this buffet. Now, interestingly enough, it's true in the spiritual, just like it's true in the physical, and that is, you are what you eat. You are what you eat. So if you are eating off of somebody else's buffet table and they get frustrated, guess what? Not very long before you're frustrated too. Ever been in that situation? Maybe you're with family, maybe you're with your spouse, your children, or the family that you've grown up in and your siblings, and you were having a happy day and you come in and that other person or those other people, they are grumpy and they are down and they are just snipping at you. How long is it before you're snipping back? Well, the reason that you turn into like they are, it's because you're eating off of their buffet. You're eating off of their buffet. And when you eat what they've got, you become like they are. It's called influence. Influence. But there's another choice. There's another option. You don't have to eat from their buffet. You could eat from God's buffet of love. And regardless of what they say, regardless of what they do, you don't have to take it. You don't have to take it personally, because you could eat off of his buffet rather than eating off of their buffet. Now, I'll tell you this, the only person or the only people that can manipulate you are the ones whom you eat from their buffet. Because if you don't eat from their buffet, then what they say and what they do cannot control you, cannot manipulate you. You are only manipulated by those whom you allow to manipulate you, because you eat from their buffet. Now, let's throw this in the context of somebody that many of us know very well. Who is it that walked on this planet, lived a human life, and ate from this buffet, the buffet of God's love, and did not eat from the other buffet, the buffet of other people, the buffet of selfishness? That's right, it was Jesus. Jesus ate from his Father's buffet of love. He never ate from other people's buffet. How do I know that? He says in John 2:24 and 25, he says that, sorry, let me just close that. He says, but Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. You know what this tells me? Jesus did not eat from other people's buffet. He didn't, because he knew what was in them. He knew what was there. And what did his Father say about him in Matthew 3:17? This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. So Jesus always had the beloved of his Father, the well-pleased of his Father. That's what he always lived by. So if somebody didn't like him, he didn't take it personally. If somebody tried to lie to him, well, he didn't take it. If somebody tried to manipulate him, they couldn't, because he didn't eat off of their buffet. If they try to tell him that he was, miserable and rotten, and he doesn't have a degree, and so why people are following you, and you're the bastard child of a peasant woman from Nazareth, and how in the world can you think that you're the Messiah, and so on and so forth. I mean, there was bad stuff that they were saying to him. You're a Gentile and a Samaritan. That's about the greatest curse that they could have given to anybody, and they were throwing those curses at Jesus. Was he disheartened because of that? Was he like, oh, I can't believe they're saying that about me? Was he taking it personally? Absolutely not. Because he wasn't eating off of their buffet. He was eating off of his father's buffet. And what does his father say? Father said, this is my son in whom I love, with whom I am well pleased. And so he always had that existence. He always had that with him. There was nothing that could disturb the peace of that communion with his Father. And whether people tried to praise him or put him down, neither of them affected him personally, because he wasn't eating off of their buffet. He was eating from his Father's buffet. Can you see how eating from the Father's buffet can set you free? Yeah. Set you free from far more than you thought it would set you free from. Now, what is it that takes? What is the action that takes, either from here or here? The action is faith or belief. Faith or belief is the thing that takes from one or the other. And that which you take from, you must trust. So you will only take from a source that you trust. If you don't trust the source, you're not going to take it. Jesus did not trust people, so he never took from them. But he did trust his Father, so he always took from him. You and I, backwards. It's absolutely backwards. We trust others, and so we take from them. We don't trust him, so we don't take from him. And our lives are miserable because of that. So, do we take things personally? Absolutely, we take things personally. Let's imagine that you had a cat. Cat was walking around on your table, knocked into the cup spills over, and now water's all over the table. How come it's water that's all over the table? Okay, well, you bump into the table, and a cup is on it, and it spills over, and now you have tea all over the table. How come it's tea that's all over the table? All right. Earthquake comes along and knocks the cup over, and now the cup spills over and there's milk all over the table. Why is it that it's milk that's all over the table? All right. Something else happens, and you had a glass that was on the table. It spills over, and now you have non-alcoholic wine that's all over the table. Why is it non-alcoholic wine that's all over the table? Well, some of you probably answered that it's because it was knocked over. Well, it's true, the knocking over is a problem, but the knocking over does not determine what comes out of it. You see, what comes out of the cup comes out because that's what was in there. If there was nothing in there, nothing would come out. And the same thing is true of people. It doesn't matter what knocks people over. What comes out of people comes out of them because that's what's in them. But we like to blame others for what comes out of us. So if somebody is being grumpy or angry, or they're yelling at you, calling you names, trying to put you down and doing other types of things like that, they're cursing at you and doing other things, they're just generally not being very nice. We can remember that it's not about us. Even if it's aimed at us and it has our name attached to it and it's directed directly to us, it's really not about us. Why? Because it couldn't come out of them if it weren't in them. So what they say and what they do and how they say it and how they do it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with them, because it shows us what's in them. Jesus put it this way in Luke 6:45. It says, "For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." And Solomon put it this way in Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23. It says, "Out of the abundance of the heart," not out of the abundance of the heart, but out of the heart flow the issues of life. And so we see that what comes out is because that's what's in there. So what other people say, what they do, how they say it, how they do it, we don't have to take it personally, because it's not about us. It doesn't reflect who we are, it reflects who they are. We can have pity for them. We can be sorry for them. We can seek to understand them, and so on and so forth. And yes, we take what they say and we filter it. We filter it to see if there's any truth that's in it. But we don't filter it by taking it personally and then trying to work through all of the flood of emotions and everything associated with it. We use God as our filter. And so if they say things, then we bring those things to God and say, okay, God, is that true? Is any part of what they're saying actually true? Well, if it is, I'm not taking it from them, but I'll take it from you. And okay, then I need to work on that particular issue. If I need to apologize, I'll apologize. If I need to do whatever, but I'm not going to take it personally. I'm not getting caught up in the thing. Don't have to argue, don't have to protect myself, and so on. So you've heard the old phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, you've also probably heard the other one, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will crush my soul. And the answer is, the question is, which one is true? And the answer is both of them. It just depends on your perspective. Do you take it? If you take it, then it'll break your bones. If you don't take it, it won't hurt you. Right? It's whether you take it or not that determines your outcome, not what they say. Remember, what they say is about them. But it's equally true that how you respond, it doesn't matter what they say, what they do, how they say it, how they do it. How you respond to them has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with you, because it couldn't come out of you if it were not in you. Now, again, if you're eating off of their buffet, it's in you. You just ate it, and it became a part of you. So that's your issue. So when it comes to relationship issues, when it comes to arguments, other things like that, then the Christian is not so concerned about what the other person is doing and what they're saying. You're concerned about yourself and what's coming out, because what comes out shows you what's in there. And we need to know what's in there because, well, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Well, sometimes we don't know it until it comes out, right? Last little bit here. Let's imagine the individual in your life that you love or you love the most. And that person, there's a special occasion that's coming up. It might be an anniversary, birthday, Christmas, something like that. And you want to get them the perfect present. And so you think about them and their personality. You go shopping all over the place, and finally you find the perfect present. And you finally, you can't buy it because it's too expensive. And so you've got to save aside for a few months, and you've been planning in advance. So you do, you earn money, you save, you do some extra jobs and so on, save the money, and then you finally buy the present. You get it wrapped up nice, and the exciting day comes, and you go up and you knock on the door. And then they open the door, and with a smile you hand them the present, and they take the present, they throw it on the ground, they stomp on it, and they slam the door shut. How do you feel? Hurt, crushed, rejected, angry, frustrated, upset, right? All of these are normal responses that people have. Well, next scenario, you work for UPS. You've been working for UPS for a long time. You enjoy your job. You're one of those brown people, like you wear brown clothes, drive brown vehicles, pick up brown packages, knock on brown doors. And so one day you stop at a particular residence. You take the package to the door. You knock on the door. The resident of the home comes out. You have them sign for the package. They sign for it. And then you hand them the package. They take the package. They throw it on the ground. They stomp on it, and they slam the door. How do you feel? Oh, not the same this time, huh? So you might be curious. You might be cautious. You might be surprised. You might be whatever. But you're not crushed. You're not angry. You're not frustrated. You're not despairing or anything like that. Why? What's the difference between the two scenarios? Well, in the first scenario, it's mine. It's my present. It was purchased with my money. It represents my love, and that was my loved one. In the second scenario, it's not mine. Yeah, not my present, not my money, not my loved one, right? Not my love. To the degree to which you believe that it is yours is the degree to which you will be personally hurt. the way where you will take it personally, you will be hurt and crushed and rejected and angry and frustrated and so on when the present is not treated the way that you think it should be. But the degree to which you believe that it's not yours is the degree to which none of that will be true. You might be curious, you might be cautious, you might be worried for them, right? You can be concerned for them, you can hurt for them, but you don't for yourself because it's not about you. And you don't take it personally. Now there's another layer to this too, and that's this, that in the first scenario, I didn't receive back what I expected. You see, we give with an expectation of return, and I didn't receive what I expected. You say, well, hang on, I don't give with an expectation of return. Oh, really? Is that true? Okay, so if you give that really expensive present and they stomp on it and you're all disappointed, why is it that you're disappointed? Are you disappointed for them? Or are you disappointed for you? You're disappointed for you. You expected them to accept the gift, to say thank you, to have some appreciation. You know, maybe you expected a hug or something like that, or invite into the house and, you know, have a conversation and for them to be happy and be able to share that happiness with them and so on and so forth, right? You had some expectation of receiving something back again and you didn't get it. And so now you're upset, you're frustrated, you're crushed, you're hurt, you know, all of those different things. By the way, what is I love you? Is I love you a statement or is it a request? Well, it's a statement. It's actually a request tucked into the form of a statement. When you say I love you to somebody that you love, and if they say, well, that's nice, and you say I love you again, they say, well, that's nice. And you say I love you again, they say, well, that's your choice. And you say I love you again, they say, well, okay. And you keep saying I love you and you get those responses. How long are you going to keep saying I love you? Not very long. Why? Because I love you is not a statement of fact. I love you is a request for I love you back. Right? So human love gives with an expectation of receiving. Giving with an expectation of receiving, just like I love you. I love you, I'm giving, I love you, but I'm looking to receive, I love you back. Human love is an investment. We put something of value in somebody with an expectation of greater value back again. So we might put time, but we're looking for belonging. We might put teddy bears, but we're looking for acceptance. We might put in conversations, but we're looking for harmony. We might I don't know, there's all sorts of things that we end up bartering for. But what we're looking for is love. That's really what we're looking for, because that's the real thing that we need. And so we put things in others so that we might get other things out of them again. You've heard the phrase no strings attached. Well, with human love, there's no such thing as no strings attached. There's always strings attached. And the bigger the gift, the bigger the string. Neighbor comes over, introduces himself, never met him before, says hi, you know, just meeting the neighbors, want to see how things are going, and here, hands you a $20 bill, walks away. You can use this however you want to. And what are you thinking? Well, he comes the first time, again, new scenario, comes the first time and introduces himself just like before. You've never met him before, hands you a suitcase, says, here, this is for you. You can use it however you want to. And he walks away. And that's curious. You open up the suitcase and $100 bills just come spilling out all over the place. Now what are you thinking? Oh, really nice guy, right? Oh, I love this neighbor. Or are you concerned, right? Who would rather accept the $20 than the suitcase full of money? I would suppose that if we did a whole survey, it'd be the majority that would rather accept the $20 bill than the suitcase. Why? Because we know the bigger the string, the bigger the gift, the bigger the string, the harder they can pull. Smaller the gift, smaller the string. So when it comes to human love, there is always strings attached. We know that by experience. We expect it. And so we're afraid of the bigger gifts because we know the bigger gifts comes with bigger strings and bigger requirements. And we think that's the same way God is, and so we're not as interested in accepting the bigger gifts from him. How much return do you need in order for your investment to pay off? It all depends upon your expectations. However high your expectations are set, that's what you need to overcome in order to have a proper return on your investment, an ROI. So that's as far as we're going to go today with this topic and getting into human love. Tomorrow, I guarantee we are going to get dark and ugly. Well, there'll be some humor involved in it, and then it's going to get really dark and ugly because we're going to start talking about the human heart. We're going to talk about the heart and how it functions, and why we make the decisions that we do. And we really need to understand our situation for what it really is so that we can do something about it. Now, again, there's been a lot more that have come on since I made this announcement at the beginning, but if you want to follow along, if you want to have a resource, then the Law of Life, all of this is coming out of the book, The Law of Life, and that can be found on Amazon, both Kindle version and paperback. And the numbers down here in the corners that you see here, those are the page numbers that we're at least in the paperback. I don't know if it corresponds to the Kindle book, but it corresponds to the paperback book, the numbers that we're following, the page number. It's also available at Uchi Pine's gift shop here and online on betterlivingcreations.com. That's our family's website, betterlivingcreations.com. So anyways, I refer you there. I am going to turn the recording off, and then I'm going to open things up so that we can close that.